This one's called At the Beach, and it's available on my Flower of Scotland collection, if you want to look that one up. It was a Wednesday. Donald Brown had taken a day off, a quiet day on the beach, just him, the sun, and a good book. That was the plan anyway. It didn't work out that way. Firstly, the train journey down was a nightmare. There were 100 kids on board, all screaming and mewling and swearing in unison. The solitary teacher accompanied them either too disinterested or too tired to control them. Then there were the day trippers, rucksacks, designer clothing, all full of their own self-importance, and to cap it all, he'd bought the wrong ticket, and he had to suffer the snickering and condescension of everybody around him as he paid the difference from the few pennies he could scrape out of his wallet. Luckily, when they arrived at the coast, the kids and the day trippers all went into town, or down along the main prom. That left Donald with a peaceful walk along the cliff path to the beach. His beach. The quiet beach where he wanted it all to himself, thank you very much. He took off his shoes as he reached the bottom of the long flight of steps, and smiled, curling his toes in the hot sand. The tide was well out, the sea a thin band of shimmering blue half a mile away. He stripped off as many clothes as could be allowed, and still protect his decorum, and settled himself down near some rocks that might just provide some shade later in the day. He'd been there for an hour. The book reeled him in quickly, and so much that he didn't hear anybody approach. The first he noticed was when a shadow fell over him, the sudden change in light causing him to start. "Sorry, son," a voice said. "I didn't mean to give you a fright." Donald looked up into the newcomer's face, but the sun was in his eyes, and all he could see was a big shadow, like a bear in the mouth of a cave. He shuffled backwards, trying to get away, and wondered if this was the last thing he was ever going to see. The shadow moved and filled in with light, and he was looking up at an old man. He'd once been tall and heavily built, but he was now bent, crippled by years. The oldster put out a hand. "John Cameron," he said. "I didn't mean to startle you. There must be some book if it keeps you from hearing a lump like me coming along." Donald took the hand to shake and felt the rough calluses, like nodules in the old man's palm. He turned the book over to show the old man the cover. "Hemingway, eh? A drunk. A womanizer at that. But man, he kent how to write a story, and he kent a wee bit of thing about life." Cameron sat down heavily and took a hip flask from inside his suit. The jacket seemed to have been made 30 years ago for a much bigger man. "Will you join me in a wee drink?" he said, offering the flask. Donald declined, the first time. But as Cameron began to spin his story, he found himself taking more sips, taking the bottle more often as well. The old man didn't notice. He was lost in a place in the story a long time ago. "I don't ken why a young fellow like you should come out here on his own on a day like this," Cameron began. "Life's for the living. You should be out having fun, making memories for a time when they'll all you have left. I used to come down here years ago, when I was much younger than you. Wasn't much different then. The sun might have been a wee bit hotter, and the sand a wee bit more golden. But it was a day just like this one that I met her. She was just a wee slippy, I think. My horns could have fitted right round her waist, but she was bony. I just had to speak to her. Over there it was." He waved his hand vaguely over to the left, the sun glinting off a heavy gold ring on his finger. She'd cut her foot in some glass, and she wasn't going to let me help her, but she couldn't walk. I carried her up the cliff, and she was as light as a feather. And I think that was when I knew she was the one for me. Of course, her mother didn't like me. That was the way out back then. Mothers were suspicious of anything in trousers. But I won her round in the end. 3 months, that's all we had. 3 months of sunshine, sea and sun, and then the war started. I wasn't going to go. What was a war to folk like me? A fight between people I didn't ken in places I'd never heard of. But the police would have got me anyway, so where would I been then? So away I went. There were tears that night, and not just for her. I promised to marry her when I got back, and then we sealed the bond in the big bed in the house up there. And 9 months later, when I was knee-deep in mud, they died. My bonny lassie and my wee daughter. Both of them. Taken away from me before I even got a chance to save them. Tears fell from the old man's eyes. Heavy tears. They fell to the sand and disappeared as quickly as they'd come. "Save up your memories, son," Cameron said, and he raised the flask to his lips and drained the last of the whisky. "Save them up, because you never ken when you might need them." Donald sat and stared at the old man, unable to speak. Nothing in his life that he'd lived so far had prepared him for this kind of naked emotion. He was saved by a voice to his left. "Dad," the voice said, and Donald turned to see a young woman running towards him. She came over and stood over the old man. "Come on, Dad, I'm sure this wee man doesn't want to hear your stories. It's time you went. Everybody's waiting for you." She put out a hand and Cameron took it. Donald was shocked to see puzzlement in the old man's face, as if he'd only just realised where he was and what he'd been doing. "Don't worry," the woman said, as if reading his thoughts. "Dad's been getting a wee bit slow recently. We'll take care of him now." She led the old man away by the hand, away down the beach and off towards the sea. "Thanks for listening to his story, though," she said as they left. "He needed somebody to hear it." Duncan watched them until they were just shivering blobs against the water, the sun making it look like there was 3 people there rather than 2. A sudden chill breeze got up, forced him to put on his shirt. When he looked back, there was nothing to see but the sand and the waves. He made a half-hearted attempt to get back to his book, but the chill seemed to have settled in, and he was forced to abandon his place and head back for the cliff path. Halfway up to the top, he heard a nee-naw of an ambulance. It was only when he reached the top he saw a small crowd gathered round the old house up there. Normally he would have walked away, avoided such groups of people. He didn't like gawking in other folks' tragedy. But he felt drawn somehow to this one. There was an old woman at the back of the crowd, sniffing into a handkerchief. "Is it no just terrible? 3 weeks he's laid there. Nobody even kent he was dead." Donald pushed closer. Just as the ambulanceman brought out a stretcher out of the house, with a white sheet shielding the body from the prurient gaze. But one of the men lost his footing on the steps, and the crowd gasped as a bare arm slid out from under the sheet. The ambulance-man moved quickly to put it back in, but Donald didn't see that. His mind was full of what he had seen. A large calloused hand, and a big gold ring that glinted in the sun as it slid off the finger and rolled down in grass and bounded down the steps.